Hello everyone, and welcome to your 67th Cocoa programming tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about using custom presentation animators to present different view controllers in our Cocoa applications. So we've seen in the past how we can put different view controllers into, say, a split view, or how we can swap out different view controllers. But what I want to talk a little bit more about today is creating custom animations between multiple view controllers and how you can really get the fine-tune functionality that you might be looking for in your own application. So an example of what we're doing here is sort of what you see on the right. And this is a single view controller that's presented here. And what we're going to do is we're going to present another view controller on top of it, essentially. So when I click on this view controller, I'm presenting this second view controller, which is represented by this yellow rectangle. And when I hit the Dismiss VC button, it's going to dismiss that view controller, right? So we have two different view controllers. And again, the overall structure of this is just single window with this initial view controller as its content view controller. And then I go to present this second view controller, which I'm going to call my Modal View controller. And I can dismiss it just like that. So notice just sort of all the little details about what's going on in the scene. We're dimming the background, and we have this little animation that fades in up and down for that particular view controller. And we're going to be implementing all of that in this particular tutorial. What I'm going to do right now is just kind of fly through all of the different things I need to set up. So I'm just going to speed up the video, and then we'll sort of jump back in once I've done all that. Alright, so now that we've set up everything in our application, I'm just going to do a brief run through of what we did. We set up an initial view controller on the window, setting its content view controller, some general initialization on this initial view controller object, some important things in the nib. Each one of these view controllers views has a backing layer, so we enabled the layer on the parent most view on both of those view controllers. You can see that in this and this. The Modal View controller just has a dismiss call, which calls one of the NSViewController methods for dismissing a view controller, which is dismiss view controller, and I'm passing myself as the thing that I want to dismiss. And that's pretty much where we are now. So now what we want to do is we want to create this custom animator object that we've left blank here. So what this requires is we just simply need to make an object that conforms to the NSViewControllerPresentationAnimator object, or I should say animator protocol. Now, to do that, we can simply make a new object. We're going to call it Modal Animator. We'll save that in here. And this object is going to conform to NSViewControllerPresentationAnimator protocol. And if I look at this protocol, we can simply see that there are two methods I have to implement, basically these two methods here. And what these look like are animate presentation of view controller, blah, 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 and animate dismissal of view controller, blah, 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 right? So these are the two methods that I need to implement. The first one is the code that's going to be run when I'm animating to a particular view controller. So basically to this view controller from this view controller. And then the dismissal of this particular view controller going back to the original view controller that we came from. So those are the two calls that are going to be made. All right, so let's look at what we had for this application. If I present this modal view controller, you'll notice that there's actually this sort of background fading that we have occurring, and that is not just happening by magic. We do need to implement that sort of ourselves. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a private class. I'm going to call it background view, and it's just a subclass of NSView. We're going to make the initializer for this using the init with frame. We're going to use super init frame rect, and I want to enable the layer. So I'm going to say wants layer to be true. Once I've done that, I can now set the background color on this layer, and I want a calibrated white. So basically there's going to be no white in this, and essentially meaning that it's black, with an alpha of 0.5, and what this gives me is essentially a semi-transparent black. Then the last thing that I want is to set the alpha value to be 0. So initially when this view is created, it's actually going to be invisible. Just keep that in mind for what we're doing in this particular example. And then need to do that. The other thing with NSView is that it requires this init with coder call. We're not going to use it because we're never going to call it from a nib or anything that's init with coder. The last call that I want to add is mouse down, which prevents most cases of mouse events going through this view. So if I want to prevent mouse events from going past this background view that I have, I can just override mouse down, and this should stop any mouse down events from going through the responder chain. But anyway, that's that. It doesn't really work perfectly. I'll look into maybe some ways that can be made better, but I have a feeling it's might not be really any good ways around it. All right, so that's what we have. So let's first get simply this background view to be set up here. I'm gonna first make a little variable here for our background view. We're gonna make a background view with a frame, and the frame is just gonna be cgrect0, basically of no size currently. But we're going to set that up right here. So what I want to do is I want to get our content view, which is really just the view that I'm coming from. So I'll say from view controller, get the view from that. And we're going to set up our background view. So the background view's bounds, or rather its frame, should be equivalent to the content view bounds, right? So that just means that the background view will be the same size as our content view. And then I want to say that the auto resizing mask for this is going to be expanding on the width and height. So I can say .view width sizable and height sizable. And lastly, I want to just add this as a subview. Oops, background view like this. All right, so that's what I have. So let's do an example of this. I'm going to just enable the alpha for a second so I can actually see this thing. We actually forgot to set up this animator though on our example. So now that I've created this modal animator object, I can simply pass this on for our animator, right? So all that this animator parameter requires is an object that conforms to this protocol. So the modal animator object conforms to this NSViewControllerPresentationAnimator protocol, and we're good to go. So now I can run this, and I should actually see that when I click on my button, I should get a darker view, which is what I get. So good, everything is working as expected. All right, let's put that alpha back to 0 for just a second. Let's continue on. So now what I want to do is I want to get my content view controller, or sorry, the view controller that I'm presenting, which is my modal view controller. I want that to be presented on top of the background view. So let's go ahead and get the modal view. We're going to take that from the view controller.view. So that just gets the view property of the view controller that we're going to. Then I want to say the modal view is actually not going to use the constraints that are set up through auto resizing masks. So I actually want to set this to be false. What this means is that I'm actually going to use auto layout in this example. The reason for this is that you'll notice if I present this and then I move my window, you'll see that there's actually some auto layout constraints set up with this particular view. So we're going to use auto layout to set that up. And to do that, I need to disable the auto resizing mask, basically saying that it should not be converted into constraints. So that's why I set it to be false. All right. To get all this to work, we're actually going to make another little variable here, and this is going to be my center Y constraint. And the reason I'm doing this is for the animation that we're going to perform later. So we're going to perform an animation with this modal view, and that is going to basically be the little animation that you see when this is presented. So this little Y animation, this Y-axis animation that goes up and down, that's the constraint that I'm trying to hold on to with a reference. So let's go ahead and set up the center Y constraint. This is just getting the modal view. We get the center Y anchor. We can create a new constraint that's equal to a new anchor. The anchor that I want is the background view's center Y constraint, or anchor, and the offset that I want is of 100. So that just means that I'm going to be 100 points away from the center of the background view. All right. So now what I want to do is I want to take my modal view, actually let's call it my background view, and I add a subview, which is going to be my modal view. Now what I want to do is activate all these different constraints that I'm going to apply onto the modal view itself. So I want to activate a list of constraints, and it's going to be with this list here. And now I just have to pass in an array of all the constraints that I want to make. So the first one that I want is a centering X constraint. So we're going to make a center X anchor dot constraint equal to anchor, and this is going to be equivalent to the background view's center X constraint, or anchor. All right, then I want to add in that other constraint that I just had, which is the center Y constraint. And now that will set up enough for me to be centered for the X and Y axes, but I also need to constrain the size of the view, and I want this to be basically inset from the background view's width and height. To do that, I just need to do the same kind of stuff that I've been doing. I want my width constraint. So constraint equal to anchor, background view dot width anchor, and we want an inset of -100. And then again, the same thing for the height. Sorry for the verboseness of this stuff, but it's kind of what it becomes. It's just long and tedious stuff that it's kind of a painful API to work with. Height anchor -100. All right, so now this should be inset from basically a 100-point inset from the width and the height for this modal view. All right, so now that we have that, I'm gonna turn back on that alpha value actually, and let's just test to make sure that this works as expected. So when I press on the button to present our modal view controller, we should see that there's my dismiss view controller down there. If I click on this, currently it doesn't do anything, and it actually is just going to yell at me because I haven't actually done what I need to do for this to work yet. So let's keep on implementing some things. To actually animate this, let's figure out how we can do that. So I'm going to put my alpha value back to 0 here, because now we're going to actually animate that alpha value. To animate these, what I need to do is use an NSAnimator context. And there's a handy dandy run animation group call that I can use. I'm going to use the context. And now I'm going to write some code that's going to allow me to run this stuff. So what I want to do is I want to say the background view, which is currently an alpha of 0, I want to change that so that it's going to be an alpha of 1. So I can simply say self.backgroundView.animate and this is important. You need to make sure that you use the Animator proxy, because again, Cocoa is kind of annoying in that regard, but we need to use the Animator proxy, and I need to change the alpha value to be 1. The other thing that I want to change is the center Y constraint. So I want to say center Y constraint. I just say self dot center Y constraint dot animator dot constant, and the constant is just the value that I set originally. Here I set the constant to be 100, but now I want the constant to be 0. So I want to animate from a constant of 100 to a constant of 0, and that should center my view should center the Modal View controller in our whole Windows view. The completion handler, I actually don't want to do anything for that, so I'm just going to pass in nil, and we should be good to go. So let's try this out, and what we should see is that the background view animates, and so does our modal view. So let's check this out. Cool, it actually does the animation that we expect. If I want to change anything about the time, I just have to use the context and change the duration. So let's just say that I want this to actually last half a second. I think the default is a quarter of a second, but we'll change that to be half a second here, and we should we'll get that change if we run it again. All right, so we're almost done. Let's finish this off now by implementing the dismissal code. So the dismissal code is what happens when I call DismissViewController with that particular view controller that's being dismissed. So what do I want to do with this? Well, I want to again use my animation context. I'm going to run my animation group, and in this case I'm actually not going to care about the context, so we'll leave that out in this case. Let's just fix up some of this line stuff here. Alright, so the code that I want to run is I want to fade out the background view, and I also want to change my center constraint to be back to a constant of 100. So I'm just going to actually copy this code here because it's sort of just the reverse of that. So I want to change my alpha value to be 0 again, and my constant should be 100 for an offset of that center Y constraint. And then in the completion block, which is what this sort of last thing got auto-completed into, I want to remove my modal view controller. So to do that, I can actually just say self.backgroundView.remove from superview. Remove from superview, and that will, because of the background, or because my modal view controller is contained in the background view, if I remove the background view, that'll also remove my view controller as well. All right, so that is that, and then I'm done. I don't have to do anything else. So let's go ahead and try this out to make sure that we didn't screw anything up, and hopefully we get a fully functional custom transition. So here we go to present my modal view controller. You'll notice it took a little bit longer to put that up because we used that half a second. Now when I dismiss it, it goes away and we're all good. So now we have a fully functioning custom animator for multiple view controllers in our Cocoa application. If you have any other questions on how we did this, basically we're just implementing a simple NS object that conforms to the NSViewControllerPresentationAnimator. We do whatever we want in this particular section. As you can see, we do quite a bit of custom code to really get all this to work, but you could maybe simplify this a little bit in some regards on your own, depending on what you're trying to do. But this is the gist of it. You just have to implement these two methods, do what you need to do to move the view into its proper position, add the view to the screen, and then do the proper thing to remove the view from the screen. And that's pretty much it. So play around with this, let me know what you think, and if you have any other suggestions on how we can improve this or what you didn't really get about the tutorial, leave your comments in the leave your suggestions or whatever in the comment section below, and I will see you guys in an upcoming tutorial. See you then.